Last day morning, plus Michael Roberts is speaking in another plenary on the other side, so I think people will start trickling in very soon. Let's begin. There are four speakers. We have Professor Marcus Taylor, Rita Ghedini, we have Professor Pratap Singh Birthal, and we also have Kavi Kumar in this panel. I welcome all of them and welcome all of you also to this session. I'm sure it will be very engaging. May I invite Professor Marcus Taylor for his presentation.
That's been doing the work, creating this wonderful conference. We are very much indebted to you. Thank you so much. And a quick thanks to TJ Jayaraman, who something like 15 years ago hosted me at Tata Institute of Social Sciences, and that helped lead to much of the research that follows. So this is based on research that I had undertaken with Dr. Suhas Bazme at Tata Institute of Social Sciences and Habitat Studies. And what I want to do is focus on the intersection of agrarian or agricultural intensification and climate change in smallholder agriculture. My concerns here are quite micro in the sense that the research methodology and the concerns are focused on the experience of smallholder farmers. And particularly, I'm going to do both some analytical or theoretical building around the concept of time, and I'm also going to show you some empirical examples of how the intersecting pressures of agricultural intensification and climate change are coming together. So, and coming together in ways that I would argue promote rural stratification, new forms of fragmentation of rural India. So, no?
Can somebody see it?
Is it just, that's probably it.
No, there's no PDF. No, you can make it's a PDF. You will have to scroll it down. It's a PDF.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. Well, up, yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. So, that's not going to... Oh, for pointing. So one of the concerns here, so the research methodology we're using, and in fact have used over the last decade, has been less based on village studies in the FAS tradition, but rather on a much more follow the project kind of methodology, in that over the last 10 years we have looked at 4 different climate smart agriculture or climate resilient agriculture projects across rural India in 4 different locations, and each time we try to time our arrival at the project more or less a year after it is completed, so that the authorities implementing the project are a safe distance away. We can actually talk to people about what actually were the intended impacts and what were the actual impacts and how and why those two diverged. So particularly, sorry, next slide, thank you. There we go. Awesome. So just very, very briefly, some of the projects we looked at was the implementation of system rice intensification in Mahabubnagar, Daulatabad. Then we went down into Mandya district there, and we looked at the introduction of a new hybrid rice variety that was meant to sort of be locally adapted to the local agro-ecosystem. Then we're in Tumkur, Naganahalli, looking at a climate-resilient village project. That was one of the 100 villages under the NICRA, the New Initiatives in Climate Resilient Agriculture project. And more recently, we've been up here in Vajrapur and Paitan in the Marathwada region of Maharashtra, and that's what I'm going to talk about. This fieldwork doing this started in 2023 with further fieldwork at about this time last year. And particularly going to focus on one cluster of villages within that. Sorry, the picture hasn't come out too well. But this is in Vajrapur. So Vajrapur is a market town just to the west of Aurangabad. I know I shouldn't call it Aurangabad anymore, but I'm going to. And what we were trying to do was look at one of the villages that had been included in the program known as Pokhara. Pokhara program on climate resilient agriculture is a $500 million program, loan from the World Bank to the state government of Maharashtra to promote, as is common with most climate resilient / climate smart agriculture schemes, increased productivity, greater water efficiency, and farmer producer organizations to try and handle the marketing side of things. So I'll talk about what goes on in this project later. But one of the interesting things, so obviously we spoke to the local agricultural extension authorities in Vajrapur, and they deliberately would not tell us where Pokhara had been run. So we had to kind of actually start the research by sort of poking around ourselves, and we focused on 3 villages to try and which we knew had connections to agricultural extension, because very often agricultural extension officers, when they're looking for a model or target village, they go back to the same village time and time again. So we started up in Rotagao, and Rotagao interestingly has a bit of a water body near it, so that part of the village gets access to that water, others is dependent on groundwater. But it wasn't the Pokhara village, but we did a whole set of interviews with smallholder farmers there. Then we moved to Lagao, and there we again, and Lagao's near the canal system down here in a part of the Godavari, and again, it wasn't the Pokhara village, but we did a whole set of interviews. And then we got to Bagura, which is the Pokhara village. We were excited to find finally. And we did a lot of interviews there about the program. But what we found is that this gave us a sort of 3 different villages, each with different kinds of dynamics because of their relative access to water. Partially but based around this lake. Here, half of the village is on the canal system, half isn't, and in Bagur it's a dry village. So this gave us some interesting ways to start thinking about it. I should say that in terms of research methodology, this isn't a sort of village study, but rather we started in the fields, and it's particularly we go right before the agricultural season starts, so lots of farmers around in this area of Marathwada, lots of houses are in the fields, and we just talk sequentially to farmers, interview them for, hey, it's the dry, it was the pre-monsoon, so they were looking to be entertained. So we'd have conversations anywhere from 30 minutes up to 2 hours with various farmers. We did about 40 interviews with various farmers of various categorizations, 5 focus group interviews, and then followed up with interviews with input dealers, irrigation dealers, market regulators, market traders, everything in the centre of Vajrapur to get a more comprehensive understanding of the agricultural environment of this area. And in this particular region, what we're finding is agriculture dominated by particularly 3 crops, and a cropping cycle that moves from cotton to maize to onion sequentially through the year. In the areas close to either the lake, as we saw with Rotagao, or the canal system, you do find sugarcane. Interestingly, I'm going to talk a lot about time, and particularly I'm going to make the argument that the experience of time within these villages is being reshaped through agricultural intensification on one side, through climate change on the other. I'm going to get into the details of that. But what we're finding is this rapid fire 3 crops a season that moves starting, in the first monsoon season, cotton, as soon as that's out of ground, a bit of maize, as soon as that's out of ground, onto onion. And onion then ends in sort of April and is harvested then, and some maybe go into May and then stop and repeat. There is some tur, there is jowar, bajri, and some vegetable cultivation on the side, pretty minimal, and obviously your typical elements of livestock as supplemental. So here's one of the quotes from one of the farmers, and this really speaks to how the experience of time and temporalities is changing. So he said, we farmers used to farm like we were playing test matches, as in 1 or 2 crops, long duration. but now we just play T20s, short, rapid fire. So one integrated match where the result of the season lasts the whole game through to more or less independent rhythm of cropping activities intermingled with the kind of livelihood off-farm employment that we've seen talked about here. I must say that it is far easier to give this example to an Indian audience than it is to a North American audience, okay? I have to go like, all right, it's cricket, okay? And cricket, imagine if you had a baseball game that lasted 5 days and the North American audience's eyes go like 5 days. I'm like, yeah, it must have been an English gentry thing. They're the only ones that had time to play games for 5 days. So yeah, we farmers used to farm like we're playing test matches. Now we just play T20s. And this got me interested in the question of time. Another farmer, when we asked them, what is the biggest constraint in profitability over the season, emphasized that he said literally, it's all about timing. It's about aligning the different moments of the agricultural season together so that you can produce incomes at the right time, which then give you the ability to reinvest in the next season, particularly moving through this kind of T20 agriculture of rapid fire, shorter duration, more independent cropping aspects. So this got me thinking about time more generally. And there isn't actually all that much written about time and agriculture, despite its obvious importance. So one of the historians that has is David Ludden. And he says, agricultural history unfolds in the seasons of everyday life in agricultural society. So the seasonality is obviously critical. That movement of climatic patterns, meteorology, the phases of growth, decay, and death of plants, pests, and so forth. So he says, seasonal time seems to be cyclical. Ideas are modeled on patterns of natural repetition that sets a certain pulse, a rhythm to agricultural life. But seasonality is also historical, a cultural construction through which people predict and gamble based on remembered experience. So the ideas coming from previous seasons affect how people look at the present and the future. One of the key arguments here is that climate change is so disrupting what we think of as seasonality that it's kind of unpicking the fabric of rural timelines from within. And I'll provide some examples of this. But then he goes on to say the synchronization of social life with nature means that big decisions must take the season into account, and decisions can directly affect the future drastically. Of course, agrarian life has the seasons of temperature, of plant growth, etc., but at the same time, it is caught within social institutions and their own temporalities. Sorry, if you might. So here's what we can see. So on the one hand, we've got the idea of agricultural seasonality, which of course is massive determinant of the rhythms of agrarian life. But we've also got other sources of what's put temporalities out there. And in the sort of words of Tim Ingold, the ecological anthropologist, says we experience time as a dense intermingling of different subtemporalities whose timelines aren't aligned. So we got market dynamics. Another person who looked at agricultural time is called E.P. Thompson, who talked about work and time discipline with the penetration of capital into agriculture. He refers to a move from task-orientated time through to time by hours, seconds, etc. As it gets, capital's penetration of agriculture imports a different understanding of time. In an Indian setting, as we heard yesterday and before, is very different. The time discipline of capitalism is passed much more through market forces and forces of finance, credit, debt, etc. That kind of discipline is on it. So particularly thinking about dynamics of market rhythms, labour cascades. Agriculture works when there's people to work on agriculture, and yet the ebb and flow of when labour is available puts a different kind of rhythm onto agriculture, particularly as in this region when agriculture is so dependent on migrant labour from the north. Intermittent off-farm livelihoods, as we heard yesterday, these are when there is work available, when there isn't a permanent thing across the year. very particular aspects. So another rhythm to when incomes come in, when money must be spent. Household and social reproduction, time use data, credit and debt timelines, very important. Take loans, when are loans due, and bureaucratic temporalities. When you look for the subsidy coming back in from your new dug well, how long do you have to wait? Is it going to be 2 months, 6 months, 2 years? We hear all sorts of things. Indian bureaucracy has its own distinct temporality. Please move on. So this kind of different timelines has been sort of disrupted by climate change. This comes from what farmers are telling us, but it's also borne out by the meteorological record. Onset of monsoon, increasingly fickle, droughts are more common, increasingly severe, heat stress, particularly in harvesting season, unseasonal rains, again I use this because they're becoming seasonal. So unseasonal rains are seasonal, those ideas of seasonality are getting ripped apart. And extreme rains leading to flooding. All of these things are shifting and interrupting the way that those other sort of timelines of agriculture come together. Farmers that can do well are ones that can keep the various timelines in sync together. Farmers that can't keep those various contrasting timelines together tend to struggle because they have to go into debt to patch together the timelines of when income arrives and expenditure needs to be spent. And that's a key determinant of this. So, for example, in onion markets, onions become boom crop in this area of Maharashtra. It's a huge gamble. As you know, the expenses for onion are relatively more expensive, but the possibility of an upswing of market is really important. An example how the temporalities come together. It is almost entirely based around migrant labour. Migrant labour shows up after Diwali, so it comes in sort of November time. It's there for the planting of onions, and it's there for the harvesting of onions. And when the onion season comes to its end, onions need to be harvested out of the ground within a couple of days. The stalk falls. At that time, we're seeing increasing unseasonal rains. So onion farmers, smallholders and large farmers alike, need to get their crops out of land. This shoves up the demand for labour. But labour is sourced in through the big farmers. The big farmers bring them in, they give them accommodation, etc. They work their lands first. Every second that goes through, the farmers are worried that if unseasonal rain comes, they won't be able to hold on to their onions. Their onions will start to spoil from the inside. So the timelines get increasing. So as farmers say, we'll pay anything at this stage. If it would normally be 700 to 800 for a labour group to come work on our land, that's going to go up at least 50% at this time of year, if not more. And of course, as the big farmers have the labourers on their land, they start taking a cut of the money as well. Say, well, I can send them to you tomorrow for this price, but you might have to wait a week for this price. And farmers are like, we've got to get these out the ground. So these kind of temporal dynamics come on, if you might. The second thing is then when you got them out the ground, you've got to store them. And storage of onions, it really depends on what your storage facilities are. If you can hold on to the onions, further into the season, the price goes up and up. If you have to sell them because either they got wet, you didn't get them out the ground quickly enough, or you can't store them securely enough, then you've got to go into the market right away. You won't get even remunerative prices. Farmers are gambling that once every 3 to 4 years, that they can actually sell big and make big money, but most years they say we'll probably just make cost maybe a little bit more. Evidently, to afford one of these, it costs a lot of money. And so you get this class differentiation of who can control labour, who can control storage, and it really shapes how these dynamics play out. In this, the POCRA program comes in. I'm not going to talk too much. I haven't got too much time, so we'll move this along. But it gave various inputs, etc. Everything from drip irrigation through to big shade net agriculture. That's the flip side of this. Shade net agriculture is the other side of this. Farmers that want to brace themselves against the T20 agriculture of the onions cropping cycle with the cotton and maize, etc., go in for this. T20, they can control the timelines of production much more efficiently within the shade net, etc. With, as I'm sure you're aware, irrigation built into the ceiling. They spray every 5 to 6 days. It's massively chemical. It's massively sort of commercialized, and it makes a packet. They say for 1 acre of shade net agriculture, you can earn as much in a season as you would for 15 acres of agriculture outside the shade nets. But of course, being able to afford a shade net, 15 lakh investment, etc., this is where POCRA comes in. POCRA distributed these. So want to just say, POCRA started distributing these, but the stratification of how benefits were distributed under POCRA were shockingly bad. As I say below, if you wanted to describe a scheme that was ripe for formalized elite capture, you would design something that looked like POCRA. Sure, most farmers got something, drip irrigation, sprinklers, etc., and they get it on 80% disc rate. Many of them can't actually afford to pay the upfront costs, bureaucratic temporality, so they get brokers or middlemen. The input dealers themselves go in for half the subsidy. We'll do all the paperwork. You don't need to wait. We'll pay the upfront costs, but we'll take half the subsidy when it comes in. But the large farmers, my goodness, they get farm ponds, shade nets, polished tractors. So this is accumulation by scheme. This is pioneering a social diversification between precision, high input agriculture on the one side and the T20 agriculture on the other. I must stop because the chairman will impose time discipline on myself if I don't, but I'll take any questions later on. Thank you so much.
Sincerely for the honor you have given us by inviting us to the prestigious conference. I apologize, I do not speak English, you know. I will read hoping to be understandable. I'm a president of Lega Coop Bologna, and I will show you any suggestion about my work and your work in Bologna. Okay. No. You must try. Yeah. Next. Next. You. Next. 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 Okay. Okay. Lega Coop master company cooperatives through major global transition, particularly those affecting our country, demographic, digital and climate transition, which if non-property management will continue to increase economic, social and cultural inequalities. Cooperatives can play an equitable role helping to mitigate the negative impacts of transition through the participation of women and men in the governance and management of economic processes that drive change and be enable enterprises in the association to tackle knowledge leap and investment that they could not sustain individually. Furthermore, cooperatives can facilitate access to knowledge, digital transition, and democratic governance of AI implementation. They can and must continue to pursue the best distribution of the value produced and the inclusion of people through work. This is the number of cooperation in Italy. You say in Italy, cooperative represent about 24% of the adult population and generate a production value equal to about 80% of the national GDP. There are 3 big associations of cooperative. Lega Coop is the major. Next, please. Next. Okay. In Emilia-Romagna, we are over about 40,000 to 1,300 active cooperative. Do you know the number of workers and involving generating turnover of an house cooperative in Emilia-Romagna, the corresponding to 13.6% of our regional GDP, and not just an economic, the cooperative in Emilia-Romagna are not just an economic model, but a true pillar of social and inclusive development. Next, please. Next, please. You show it, the number of Lega Coop Bologna. We represent 185 associated companies with a value of production more than 15 billion and 2 million members. Some cooperatives are associated to Lega Coop Bologna are market leaders in the social, consumers, and services sector. Next, please. Next, more, and next. We are cooperative users, cooperative workers, and support cooperative. And our cooperatives are cover the total sector in our market. Next. Yes. Lega Coop Bologna bases action on the SDGs in United Nations 2030 agenda. Since 2018, has adopted an aggregation sustainability report which monitors the contribution of cooperative with Lega Coop Bologna to achieving the United Nations 2030 agenda's goals in the metropolitan area where it operates. Thanks to methodological support of the leading universities engaged in achieving sustainable development goals. And thanks to a platform that collects impact data consistent with certificated institutional indicator and standards, standard related to coherent territorial benchmarks of Lega Coop Bologna. Lega Coop annually reports the sustainability performance of its affiliates. Member cooperatives adopt practices to improve, next please, water resource efficiency, promote gender equality, and support corporate welfare. For example, 67% of cooperatives have activated processes to improve water use, while the next 71% have implemented measures for work-life balance, and Lega Coop cooperative perform better than other local companies in gender equality, work inclusion, respect for diversity, and benefit producing. Next, this is the number of quality education, and we are engaged many cooperatives. And next, okay, in education support for the children of employees and members of cooperatives, 86% cooperative employees can benefit from company welfare for their children in the form of study orientation courses, scholarship, and summer trainings. Next, please. Gender equality, I say. Next. And you see percentage of female employment, 61%, and woman manager, woman on board of director, and woman president or vice president of our cooperatives. Next, please. Next. And next. Two. No? This is data of said you Simona yesterday. Next. Ancora. In agriculture, we present the last July the cooperative manifesto of Lega Coop for the Mediterranean diet. The Mediterranean Diet Manifesto is a document promoted by various organizations such as Lega Coop, which interprets the Mediterranean diet as a model of development based on sustainability, health, and equity, education, and innovation. You show the manifesto on Lega Coop website. And other innovation project we show you. Next. Yeah. Lega Coop is active part of the innovation ecosystem of Emilia-Romagna, collaborating with research centers and Technopole. This is Dama Technopole that we are member, and inside that hosts some of the most APC computer. We believe it's essential that the digital transition service company enterprise increases their competitiveness, resilience, and the opportunity to improve the quality of mutual exchange. We also believe the cooperation must commit to democratizing data ownership and access, and can represent a key player in ensuring a democratic, inclusive, and right-respecting digital transition for people and living communities. For this reason, we are studying and developing prototype in the field of data cooperatives and the mutualistic code of conduct in their use. At the same time, we are supporting cooperatives in deriving the greatest benefit from the evolution of APC and AI according to the sustainability principle to inspire us. We show, next please, an example, next. Among the projects supported by digital innovation with a particular focus on agriculture, some example is here. One is Tornatura. Tornatura is a measure in agriculture, which work on development of a web app for predicting pest infestation in relation to climate change in agriculture, thanks to artificial intelligence. The next. Life Data, Simona yesterday, is a project for resilience to climate change in agri-food supply chain. And the next. And Biocast in agri-tech solution for management agricultural waste and estimating to potential for biomethane production using smart sensor and adaptive AI. And some members, us members, agricultural cooperatives are hosting the system's first tests. In conclusion, the Italian cooperatives movement confirms itself as a dynamic and innovative actor able to combine economic development, social inclusion, and sustainability. In times of crisis, for example, as during the recent terrible floods are in Emilia-Romagna areas, Cooperation has always demonstrated its transformative capacity, becoming a tool for redemption and improvement of people's and communities' living conditions. Cooperatives are ready to respond to new needs of our society: care of the elderly, promotion of the social integration, fight against energy poverty, housing emergencies, soil impoverishment, and land degradation. Collaboration between cooperative institutions and stakeholders will be fundamental to face future challenges and promote a fair and responsible growth model in which the social and solidarity economy can represent an alternative to extractive capitalism and the same time a vision of a world, an act of mutual trust, a model of democratic community. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You can, Professor Birthal, you can you start sharing your slides? I think you can see your slides already.
Okay.
Yeah, but you can go to the slideshow mode maybe. Yes, please.
Okay, thank you, Franz, for giving me this opportunity to share some of my work which I did on climate change and adaptation in Indian agriculture. What I will be presenting here, unlike what Marcos presented, is experiences on farmers playing T20 against climate change, primarily based on the field surveys. I will be, combining some data, both from the secondary granular level data from district level to estimate the effects of climate change, and then combining it with the kind of adaptation with the field level data from the situation assessment survey of farm households, and then to establish connections between two, how different kind of adaptation measures, etc., they can have a beneficial impact in mitigating the climate change. We are very well aware of this fact that India has come out of a situation from food insecurity to food surpluses, and primarily driven by the technological change and the leverage sport policies. But over a period of time, of course, what has happened is the kind of policy support, the long-standing policy support in terms of input subsidies, particularly for fertilizers, electricity, etc., and then assured procurement of farm produce at minimum support prices. It had created some kind of, challenges for the agriculture sector. And there are two main challenges, particularly the one challenge that emerged from this kind of, continuing policy support is the degradation of the natural resources, particularly the groundwater resources in northwestern India and some parts of the southern regions. The another, of course, the major challenge that we have been witnessing for quite some time and we will be witnessing in future is the changing climate. And this year we are seeing its effects, very aggressively on climate change. But when there is a climate change, it has both direct effects on agricultural productivity, food supplies, but also it has an indirect effects, particularly on the natural resources. When there is a drought, farmers excessively withdraw groundwater resources, and then of course, this kind of cycle of starts leading to further degradation of natural resources, reduction in farming, increase in poverty and all that. Now, when we're talking about the climate change, there are basically three stylized effects if you look at the global level. The first is that agriculture being of biological nature, it is more affected by climate change than other sectors of the economy, whether it's industrial or the services sector. And this evidence at the global level is very well documented. Another fact is that developing countries, they are more affected by climate change than the developed countries. And again, if you go down to that downstream, then what we observe is the small group of farmers who are more affected by climate change than the large one. These developing countries with a small number of farmers, they, because of they are equally exposed to the climate change or climatic events, but they differ in their adaptive capacity, which gives rise to this kind of differential impacts of climate change on developing countries and across farm sizes. Now, India, it is one of the hotspots of climate change. It ranks among the top 10 countries which are most affected by the climate change. And this is a matter from where, which I have taken from our Indian Meteorological Department. And what we find is that much of India is affected by climate change. And it's a small exposure, particularly it was basically the semi-arid and arid kind of regions of the district which are more exposed to the climate change, they are more vulnerable to climate change. Now, and when we look at this kind of the impact of the climate change, what we find is that this is one study which I conducted some time back. And there, what we were using that state panel data, we created a state panel data from UN and that on the number of incidences of different kind of climatic events in different states in India and for a period of about 40 years. And then we try to see how these extreme climatic events they have affected the agriculture sector. But one thing what we observe is that over a period of time, the frequency of extreme climatic events it has increased considerably. And here there are different types of climate such floods, droughts, heat waves, and cold waves, cyclones, etc. We have not included in our analysis. But what we see is that here the floods appear to be more frequent. But generally floods are localized; they are not widespread. But droughts are really widespread whenever they are. And sometimes, particularly, we all remember that 2003 drought year. So there were significant droughts across the country. At the same time, the problem of heat wave and floods that also happened throughout the countries. Now that means we are facing multiple types of climatic risks and agriculture. And then what we try to see the impact of these events on India's agricultural productivity growth. And what we found is that on average, during the past 40 years, the climatic events that could reduce India's agricultural productivity growth by over 25%. And across these different kind of events, it's the droughts that cause more loss to agricultural productivity, then followed by, of course, the heat waves, floods, and cold waves. Another interesting observation, as I said in the beginning also, there is a considerable spatial heterogeneity in the impacts of the climate change on agricultural productivity. It is the low-income states which have low adaptive capacities. They are more prone to this kind of climatic events. They face more challenges of managing the climatic impacts of the climate change. Now, in the future, India's not only globally, of course, India's climate will be much more warm. And different kind of scenarios, these RCPs, which were termed earlier, now of course they have been now renamed in the recent IPCC report. Now, ours is the most plausible scenario that we reported for agriculture for India. It is the RCP 4.5. where the temperature is expected to rise in the range of 1.1 degree to 2.6 degrees Celsius by the end of this century. So we try to estimate the impact of this scenario on agricultural crop yields using the GMO technologies. And what we find are two different scenarios, and particularly here only for the mid-term kind of impacts. On this, and this paper, of course, it has been published in the land use policy some time back. But what we observe is in the RCP 4.5, It is a chickpea. Chickpea that is a rabi season crop that will become most effective. Yield of this chickpea followed by the pigeon pea and paddy, rapeseed, mustard, maize, and the cotton and wheat, they will be the least effective. That means, and likewise, if you go for the RCP, look at the RCP 8.8, that means if the temperature rises at a much faster rates, the ranking of these crops also changes considerably, particularly the pigeon pea becomes most effective by climate change, and then paddy, maize, chickpea. So this kind of scenarios, it all depends on the kind of losses, or depends on the rise in the temperature, whether it will be following the rise, will be following the RCP 4.5 or the extreme RCP 8.5. Now, one thing versus, of course, that it is clearly that the crops differentially respond to the temperature rise or the climate change. So accordingly, we have to see how this one climate change will be. But one important point that generally what we find in the literature, or it has not been studied much in the literature, is that how climate change will impact the cropping patterns. Our understanding of the impact of the climate change is restricted to the impact on either the aggregate agriculture productivity or crop yields, but how the cropping patterns will change. And a common assumption that is in the literature when we study climate change is that there is no accurate response, but there is always an accurate response. Crops yields and the production they respond to crop prices of competing crops, climate variables, technological change, and of course the climate change. So there is always an accurate response. It is very well established in the literature, and that accurate response particularly it will determine the prices and the yields of crops. They will determine the comparative advantage as measured by the profit. And profit that is on the price and yield, which is then the price and yield, they are the key channel for estimating the accurate response in the changing climate scenario. What we have done is that we predicted the yield of each crop by regressing its historical yield, district level yield on temperature, and then controlling for the precipitation, crop prices, time trends, and time varying factors. Now, then the assumption that the farmer's land allocation decisions are conditional upon crops' comparative advantage in terms of their expected yields and the prices. We estimate the area sales of crops as a function of their predicted yields to see how that area cropping patterns will change. Now, what we find here is that under RCP 4.5 scenario, in the medium term, what we observe is that most of the crops, the area share of the most of the crops will decrease, except that a groundnut and soybean, which were much compared to crops, and the most affected will be, of course, the millets and the rapeseed mustard in the medium. But in the long run, the changes will be much significant, and in the long run, what we find is the rapeseed mustard, whose area will be affected much more than any other crops. And again, the soybean and groundnut will be gaining some area share again due to the climate change. Now, another important point is that with climate change, there will be shifts. There may be a regional shift in the crops. What we observe is that groundnut, particularly among the three crops, what we found is that even under medium term and the long term, what we observe, there will be rise in the temperature. The groundnut will shift more towards the southern states. It will gain, area share will gain. Particularly in the southern states, it will may move from that, from the visual regions. But it will also particularly lose in the central states. They will not be. Likewise, the cotton also, it is expected to lose in most of the parts, but there are some pockets where the cotton area may increase. Likewise, in the soybean also, because in the central parts, of course, there will be some gain, central and eastern parts soybean will gain. Particularly in the case of paddy also, there will be, again some kind of regional shifts in the paddy area. And what we observe is that particularly in the eastern region that will gain in paddy because of the sufficient availability of water. But some, for a period of time, the particular, some states like some regions, particularly in the central and western region, they may lose that. Likewise, in the south southern region will gain in areas where we engage with the change in the climate change. Likewise, the millets are shown presently also. There will be some gain in PGP area in the southern states, where it will move from the north to southern states. Similarly, if you kind of in the rabi crops or winter crops, what we find is that wheat area may increase, particularly the endogenetic in some parts of the eastern region also. But interestingly, what we observe in the case of the chickpea, in the chickpea there will be some depth in the western which may gain, but it will move more towards the southern parts, and it's happening already. Chickpea is becoming important crop, particularly in Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, which was not an important crop about 25 years back. Rapeseed mustard also it will not gain much, and likewise of millet. So these regional shifts are also very important. But this is an important point to see how the climate change will lead, and according to the strategies for crop diversification of the crop, this will they can be taken up. Now then I come to the important issue, maybe Professor Kavi Kumar will be telling much more in detail on how to manage the climate impacts when the age are in this one. Now, we observe that the farmers face multiple risks, and they vary in the area of frequency and severity. And sometimes in the same regions, these farmers face the floods or the heat waves or the drought simultaneously. Thus, a single blueprint for risk management is unlikely to help manage all types of risks. So hence farmers, based on their experiences, they choose different kind of measures, their expectations, occurrences of climatic events and the cost of management. So they choose either the risk mitigation or risk coping or risk averting kind of measures. So they combine different kind of strategies to manage risk and to create, to manage the complex risk management portfolios. Then what we have tried to say is that particularly that when there is, always, drought or heat stress, irrigation is one of the most important adaptation strategies. In case of drought, now what we see is that generally the drought is this one seen as a deficit rainfall less than 20% below normal. But drought itself, it is a function of not only deficit rainfall but excess temperature also. And we have seen that excess temperature is more harmful than the rainfall deficits. So what we observe is there is no denying that drought, when there is a drought of average intensity, the losses, there is a losses in direct, but irrigation, it not only enhances yield, but it also offsets adverse impact of the climate change. But likewise, in case of the communal heat stress, in case of wheat, here again we try to see that heat stress at the time of the flowering and grain feeding stages, how it influences. And again, we created a heat stress index considering the intensity, persistence, and the frequency of temperature rises. Again, what we observe is that for the heat stress, at the terminal heat stress, it reduces yield loss of wheat about 4% on an average, but very many. But again, when we're talking about that adaptation kind of things or the mitigation, it is the irrigation, it not only enhances yield, but also offsets the adverse effects of climate change. Now, an interesting point that is emerging from both this drought in case of rice and the terminal heat stress in case of wheat, that the risk benefits of irrigation have slowed down over time because of increasing scarcity of the water. So this is an important limitation when we look towards irrigation as a medium. So we have to look for some other alternative options. Now, one of course that micro irrigation and solar power in agriculture. You know, micro irrigation, lot of studies have indicated that it not only saves water, but it also improves water use efficiency and saves water. Now, currently, you know, the area and the micro irrigation has increased considerably, particularly after that implementation of the Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana. And we have estimated that over 85 million hectares of land that can be brought under micro irrigation. And if entire potential is harvested, then we can save about 65 billion cubic meter of water, which is sufficient to irrigate 30 million hectares of land. Likewise, you know, solar pumps. Now, unfortunately, we have about 21.5 million solar pumps in the country, and they can generate a solar power of about 102 gigawatt. But unfortunately, the solarization is very low. Only hardly 1% or 2% of the total tube wells in the country, they have been solarized. But if entire this tube wells, they can be solarized, so they can reduce carbon dioxide emission considerably. That means mitigating the climate impacts. Now, another most important strategy in this kind of situation is the crop diversification. The crop diversification is not only say reducing this kind of risk of climate change. So again, what we observe is that in case of both the heat stress and rainfall deficit. Now, when diversification increases, it helps stabilize both yields, productivity of the crops. Now, of course, that again, you know, crop insurance is one of the most important, you know, risk transfer mechanisms. In India, launched this Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana in 2018, and it was for that within 2 years we will be bringing about half of the total crop area and the crop insurance. But you know, uptake of insurance is influenced by a number of factors. Particularly, the first is that the farmer will adopt the insurance if they feel that they are better with its adoption. And then they will try to compare its benefits with a similar kind of, you know, adaptation of the mitigation measures. So, but you know, in the existing literature, there is a very limited evidence why the benefits of crop insurance vis-a-vis other alternative measures. So we try to see that we consider irrigation as an alternative to insurance, because insurance exceeds crops. And irrigation, you know, it plays a dual role, as I said in the beginning. But insurance also, it reduces farmers' exposure to risk transfer. And actually, fair insurance contract should give farmers exposure. Expected farm income unchanged. Thus, that demand for irrigation will compete with demand for crop insurance. Now, this is one another point that you require investment in irrigation in the beginning itself as a mitigation of the risk transfer throughout the crop cycle. Now, another is that insurance influences crop yields also. We talk about the risk transfer, but it also influences crop yields, feedback effect on farmer decision of adoption of technologies and inputs. Now, what we find is that when we're talking about the insurance, the benefits of insurance, particularly the productivity benefits of insurance, they are about 1/3 of the benefits of irrigation. Likewise, on the risk also, downside risk, what we observe, that payoff from insurance, they are significantly about half of that. But when you combine both together, the payoffs are quite significant. So one of the reasons for this is low adoption of this that or from here what we are seeing that apart from this, that payoffs to irrigation are certain, while those from insurance are not certain, because the farmers have to pay the insurance premium before the sowing of the crops, and they will able to realize its returns once the crop has failed. Now, again, interestingly, what we observed.
Dr. Birthal, I'm very sorry, but maybe you could.
Risk transfer, risk scoping, and all these kind of things. And you see here, it is again, it is a bundle strategy that helps more realize productivity as well as reduce the risk. Ecosystem services, of course, there are a number of ecosystem services, but we don't have any payment system for payment of ecosystem services. There are to manage the climate. Here again, it's very important, climate finance. Now, generally our focus has been on credit policy and focus on productivity enhancement, neglecting its impact on that. But climate finance, credit, it also reduces significant risk. So important implication is that it should be a part of it. Again, of course, the research plays a very important role, but we have fortunately spent very little on agriculture research. The Indian Council of Agriculture has had a number of stress program varieties of different crops and different kind of climatic environments. And the most important was as we hear from the beginning, when you are talking about the management of the risk, it is the household which are more affected, and from the state is the policy makers. So how to translate the policies at the household level? There are layers in between, administrative layers, at the district level, at village level. So there should be an effective coordination among different kind of administrative setups to improve the resilience of the. And finally, if there are certain research gaps, in that generally we have always focused on the impacts of climate change on cereals, pulses, and other growing horticulture and agricultural species. Then of course there is very little understanding about how climate risk will transmit from production to consumption along the supply chain. Cross-border effects of climate change, there is some research, but interestingly how social safety nets, they influence the adaptation and mitigation strategies. I found that our PDS system, it negatively affects adaptation and mitigation, particularly among the marginal farmers. So how it can help improve upon that? Then of course there is the technologies and effects of advisory stages. There more research required on these issues. And thank you so much, Professor, giving me another 1 or 2 minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor. It was a pleasure listening to you, and we didn't want to stop you for some time. But finally we had to. But it was a very, the reason is it was an extremely interesting and engaging presentation. Thank you so much for joining us today. The last presentation of the day is by Kavi Kumar. Kavi, can you please
Yes.
share your slides? Professor Birthal, could you please stop sharing the screen? Yeah.
Yes, yes,
Thank you.
I hope mine is visible.
Yes, please, you can start.
Thank you, Ramakumar, and also thank you, organizers, for giving me this opportunity. And as I mentioned in the beginning, apologies for not able to join in person. So a lot has been said already on the climate change, I guess. So I'll try to be as brief as possible because this is target of the conference also. I guess one aspect that I want to pick up right from the beginning is something that is often taken for granted, which is on the climate data. I spent a little bit of time on that and where do we get and how do we get kind of an issue. Then largely I try to focus on adaptation, how ecological issues are shaping up there, and how the IPCC reports actually define and deal with the adaptation, and then also try to take stock of the costs, needs, and the financial issues related to adaptation. And finally, I try to make some observations based on whatever this overview that I'm trying to provide. So this is not a micro study, completely at a broad stroke on what I understand from the literature as it stands. So very often from the social science perspective, I don't expect you to read any of these. I just want to present it for the sake of placeholder. So there is a lot of assumption that the climate change data is easily available. Unfortunately, it is not the case, especially from a social science perspective. Quite often this is called Latin and Greek. So quite often it is provided in a grid format, and this grid format one generally has to superimpose with the kind of administrative boundaries to arrive at what we are talking about on a particular day, in a particular year, in a particular region, what is the max temperature, minimum temperature, and so on. It's quite a bit of a task, frankly speaking, from a social science researcher's perspective. And I think we just take it for granted that this is doable by everybody. not to say that one cannot do, but it's just an unnecessary exercise in my view. I just want to give you a glimpse of some things that we did recently to just extract out the Tamil Nadu, the various patterns in the last 70 years, how the max temperature, minimum temperature, rainfall have shaped up, and also how different districts, innovative trend analysis shows between last previous 30 years to last 35 years, how the max temperature across districts has varied. This is not to give you an exhaustive view, but just to give you a glimpse of how the data that emerges from the grid can be translated into administrative boundary level details and so on. But basically, I want to keep this box item that I kept here is what I wanted to highlight from this. Whether in climate data corresponding to administrative units such as districts, usually not publicly available. Every researcher doing this exercise seems less desirable and also contributes to a lot of uncertainty because a lot of questions go into how do you translate from the bigger data to the administrative boundary level. So it would be helpful to have an official source of such data. Of course, researchers like us, we have been putting forward various such data sets for people to use. But I think everybody using a different kind of source makes no sense. And I think I've been in this field for more than now 30 years, so I still don't see an official data source. And it makes a lot of sense for all of us who are working in climate change to have a proper official source for this. This is completely a kind of a personal agenda for me to keep saying it in various places, and I thought I should say this in this forum as well. Now, basically, on the impact part, in the agriculture particularly, if I look at Dr. Birthal has given a lot of detail on various macro estimates that he and his colleagues have been doing. I think largely, as is indicated, crop soil water nexus with regard to climate has been one of the primary area of research and where a lot of work has been done, but still a lot less understood because many crops, particularly cash crops and other crops are not proper, horticulture crops, they are not properly covered. And then you have animal livestock productivity impacts of climate change are much less understood. Any implications on the livelihood and migration patterns are less understood. Heat stress, particularly labor productivity decline with changing climate conditions, and the resultant morbidity and mortality issues, that is also very less understood. So also we could have disease outbreaks, and that aspect is also not being properly. Disease outbreaks not necessarily human, but also insect population and so on. And then climate change, extreme events, conflicts, and food insecurity. These aspects all are not being done at all, frankly speaking. So we have a little bit of understanding of the first bullet point that I kept there. And within that, if you want to understand adaptation, so largely with and without adaptation, if you look at the right top portion of this graph, they give the kind of a response function would be less concave, it's more concave kind of a response function with and without adaptation. So essentially the idea of adaptation, the way it is understood in the climate change literature is, are we going to do something more intensively what we have been doing, or go beyond the intensive use of an existing technology to bring in some kind of an extensive response, so which is like changing your way of irrigation or changing your crop cultivars completely and so on and so forth. So how this understanding of adaptation is, how it is understood, it has an implication on the way in which we model. So if you look at the climate change impact literature modeling, a large number of models, especially I'm looking at the statistical models, not so much on the crop simulation models and so on. Within the statistics, which of course have increased significantly in the last several years in terms of the statistical analysis to be done to analyze climate change impacts, especially in the agriculture context. The cross-section models have been the most prominent one, which actually tried to pick up the climate impacts, which is given by the equation one there. I showed which many of you could do, but I'm not going into details there. The panel models, of course, which actually bring the weather variation into picture alongside the climate variation, and try to kind of measure or estimate the coefficients more effectively or more without bias. And that's considered an improvement largely in the mid-2000s. And then, of course, in the bargain, what we ended up doing is instead of measuring the climate change impacts, we are measuring weather radiation impacts, and which is actually not same as measuring climate change impacts. So that's how around 2015-16, you have the emergence of long difference models, which actually, instead of looking at annual variation, the outcome variables as well as the temperature and rainfall, look at a decadal variation, and that gave us a little better understanding of the adaptation and the way in which adaptation could be measured. So if you compare the long difference and band models, you get a sense of how much is adaptation or the role played in adaptation. But of course, a much recent advancement in this area is Birthal et al. Where they basically said, instead of doing it, you separate modeling frameworks, one like a panel model and then separately as a long difference model. Why don't we combine everything into a single unifying framework, and so that we can measure the climate change adaptation in a more effective manner. And essentially what we are seeing is the second equation that I just mentioned here. So the idea of the P-bar is essentially a running, like a moving average of 30 and mean. So that would give us a better sense of calculating the climate change impacts. And with the beta C coefficient, we measure the climate change impacts, and beta W coefficient will give the weather impacts, and the difference between them will give you a sense of adaptation or the role played with adaptation. So this is considered as a much better way to capture, and I think a lot of research is still pending in this area. We still are stuck in most of the existing estimates are stuck at the mid-2010s literature, that is 2016-17 kind of literature, where the estimates are comparing the panel and the long difference methods. So what is the evidence that we have of the climate change in the impact literature? What is the adaptation? We have done some estimates comparing the panel and the long difference. So this actually gave us around 21% of the short-term impacts in the ice age could be reduced through long-term adjustment, which essentially means that is the extent of adaptation that we are talking about if you compare model results between these two model strategies. But of course, the similar kind of evidence is also found in aggregate macro level estimates like climate change impacts on economic growth. There we have a series of works that suggested almost 50% of the short-term impacts could be offset to longer, largely through the adaptation. Our own work in this context, in Indian context, I actually given a similar indication, but I am not reporting that result yet. Now, in contrast, where is the climate change adaptation literature? That's a very rapidly and exponentially growing literature. A large number of studies document what is the adaptation undertaken on the ground for people, what is the effectiveness of those adaptation measures, what are the factors that are affecting the various adaptation choices, and so on and so forth. But actually, most of those response strategies are very similar to what have been done in the past for several decades. Something like crop management, irrigation, water management, farm management, financial management. All these are essentially already known and being done. So these are also, of course, being classified as incremental, systematic, and transformation categories, but the large majority of them are essentially incremental adaptations, and this literature largely remains disconnected from the climate change impact literature that I discussed before. So it's kind of a disconnect there, first observation to my point of view. Now, in contrast to that, there is an IPCC. Personally, I felt that IPCC, when it came in, it was supposed to be providing a synthesis of existing literature, but somewhere the role has changed. I don't know what changed and how it changed. It became the way IPCC started guiding the literature. What IPCC says, others start following, and there is a lot of research that emerges out of it. So I don't know whether this is the right role for the IPCC or not, but I leave that for a different discussion, and I won't take that point here. But what happened in the IPCC literature is adaptation, how it has been used or referred in the literature, started influencing the literature that I showed previous slide, which is climate change adaptation literature. So till 2000, at the third assessment report, very little focus on climate change adaptation, largely mitigation focus. Then you started having this vulnerability definition, vulnerability as a function of exposure, sensitivity, and battery capacity, and so on and so forth. Then 2007 started bringing the notions such as transformational adaptation, but it was very much at a theoretical or a discourse level, not translated into anything. And then there was a paradigm shift to move away from the climate vulnerability assessment to risk assessment. Essentially, AR5 came up with this risk management as against vulnerability. So risk is being defined more as functional hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. Now, adaptation has been considered as a way to manage climate risk, unlike the way TAB has, or third assessment has defined it. So, there is a little more formalization of the transformation adaptation. In AR6, what I just see highlighted is red here, the focus has been on observed adaptation along with the assessment of effectiveness of and the efficiency of those observed adaptations. So it's kind of a driving force behind what we see in the exponential growth in the climate change adaptation literature, and largely because of what's happening to the IPCC processes. Now, is that right or wrong is a different matter, but it's usually that's what the way in which it has shaped up. Now, in contrast to this, where is the cost of adaptation coming out? So the cost of adaptation has actually been largely driven by the idea that if you have a certain decline in the productivity potentially due to climate change, what are the response strategies that we can undertake to fill that gap? And what are the costs of those response strategies? So those interventions essentially led us to estimate things like UNEP 2023 estimate of climate change impact costs. So essentially, you have it. Yeah, I see that. Thank you. So we see that, for instance, a large gap between what are considered as needs for adaptation, where different countries have projected their needs for climate change adaptation, and then there is a bunch of costing estimates, and compared to that, there is finance availability. So these are the needs expressed, these are the costs, and these are the finances, and the wide variation. There are other estimates available in the literature, but essentially this relative difference manifests throughout the literature. So, basically there is a large regional divergence and also this encouraging costing measures. Largely it is going for the countries which are more likely to be affected by the sea level rise and so on. Agriculture-related climate change adaptation costs were much less and so on. The same kind of a story is repeating in Indian countries also. If you look at the SAPC, that is State Action Plan on Climate Change 2.0, the current available estimates from various states as compared to the CPI show that there is no relation between the vulnerability of the state or the agricultural vulnerability of the state vis-a-vis the adaptation needs that they express. It's more to do with the kind of the states which are more aware or started asking more, as simple as that. So we just took something in the Tamil Nadu, for instance, in the SAPCC 2.0, in its draft report, what they estimated as agriculture-related activities and the budget related to that. And then just bifurcated that further into sub-activity, a bunch of 5 activities for which what they estimated as total budget, what the state would give, what the center would give, and what would be the gap. And from that per year, what the state is actually estimating its goal to be. These were estimates for 2021 to 2030. So the state contribution has been identified. Then we just compare that with what the state has been putting under these same schemes in the last 5 years in its own budget. So there is no comparison between what the state is claiming to be actually putting into the climate change adaptation funds as well as compared to what it has been doing. So there is a bit of a hand-waving going on. I don't need to pick up one particular state here. I guess a lot of states are also in the similar boat. I just picked up something to show as an idea here. So just to conclude, what I'm trying to say is there is a need for better understanding and measurement of adaptation to the climate change impact assessment and aligning it with the climate change adaptation literature. So we need a better assessment of adaptation cost, that is again synergize with the climate change in agriculture. You need to obviously mobilize finances so that everybody understands this. So there is a little more transparent approach is needed between the budgets of the CPCC. But last but not least, what I'm more concerned about it is using climate change as a motivating or a galvanizing force to bring about much needed responses to a variety of risks for the farmers can be seen as a good strategy. Because a bunch of the responses that we talked about as climate change adaptation that are being documented now are part of the larger agenda of climate change actual adaptation, because both the short and long term eventually overlap. However, switching this to carries the danger of thinking that short-term responses are indeed climate change adaptation. So it undermines the efforts to go beyond the incremental adaptation towards the transformational adaptation. This concern, of course, is justified when one needs the stagnant or falling public investment in agriculture, whereas long-term climate change concerns one would expect is there should be a substantial increase in these investments. Just the members, most of us are aware, just some members for us to look at how the investments are being operated, picking up in the public investments. So with those things, I close. Thank you very much for it.
Thank you. So we have very interesting and different four presentations, overlapping in many ways, but also different in their own ways. Now it's the time for questions. You can raise your hands, yes, Jayaraman.
For your presentations, and since I had a little bit of a hand in putting this session together, so I'm particularly grateful that we have had such a rich overview of the state of play in adaptation. So we've had a very micro view of what it entails for the farmer, at the, where really things happen. And this, of course, is something that interests us deeply, and that is Marcus's work. Rita, Dr. Rita Ghedini brought a very different institutional perspective. How can institutions, quote unquote, of the working people, given all the circumstances under which they function, how can they intervene? And there are many concerns that she expressed about the privileging energy access, etc., are very important. I must say on a lighter note that I am a votary of the Mediterranean diet well before we discovered that it was sustainable. So, irrespective of that, it's nice that it is sustainable, but I think a lot of people in this room were with the Mediterranean diet for a very long time. And you can see the reach of the Mediterranean diet in the food we have been eating. There's not a day without pasta, if you would have noticed. So we have been going quite far. So I think there's an opportunity here, I think, with the presentation about the experience in Italy with cooperatives. They are, of course, cooperatives that function with a level of sophistication and achievement and institutional support, etc., which is very strong, and this is not quite comparable here. But this whole idea of, on the one hand, we have this farmer-producer organizations. To what extent, under a slightly more progressive vision, how can we transform them? How can we leverage them? And there are opportunities where governments are willing to experiment to some extent. And but of course, accounting for the fact they are not quite the same as cooperatives. So I think as non-profit corporate entities. So I think this is fruitful, but it requires a huge amount of work still, I think. But this is something I think we should take forward. It's very important for us also, we are in the same kind of analysis what Professor Birthal and Dr. Kavi Kumar both have presented. And I think On the one hand, a lot of the work in India officially on climate change adaptation in agriculture has been driven by agriculture scientists. So it's like, it's not very difficult persuading doctors that you have to study social epidemiology. But it is much harder persuading agricultural scientists that there is life beyond the crop model. And I think Professor Birthal is within the system, so he would know this even better than us. That so people think that a string of crop models calibrated for various reasons is the way to understand, but that is just not. I think does not capture what is happening on the ground. So I think the work that both of them have presented, and particularly the combination and the emphasis from both of them, and I think Professor Birthal as well as Dr. Kavi Kumar, about the need for multiplicity of approaches. So decision making tailored to the situation at hand, to the local complexities, etc. So I think one useful collaboration across people who are like-minded in this kind of thing is some kind of decision support tool. I'm not saying that this should be reduced to something which is a favorite of multilateral organizations like FAO and bank, etc. Oh, we have a tool, plug this, use this, you will solve all your problems. Not like that, but a sort of how to guide the people towards decision making in adaptation, taking note of also what are the gaps, what do we need to find out on the ground, what do we need by way of research. I think a collaborative effort, Professor Birthal, Professor Kavi Kumar, if we can engage in this, I think this would be of substantial value, and I look forward perhaps to us taking a few initiatives in this. Thank you so much once again for all your presentation.
And also understanding climate change, which is also not a lot. I have something to say, which is, so when we talk about climate change and adaptation as well, what I see here is when we frame the question, it comes with something with Dr. Kasha called anticipatory ruination, which frames climate change as an ultimate evil which is actually going to destroy everything. And now with that, they offer solutions which are still in the same kind of in the same development regime, putting questions with externalities, investment, risk, insurance. But what I feel like we often ignore the regional environmental and developmental issues which are bigger and actually are causing most of the agricultural problems. So with that, what I feel like we still have this bigger question. Is it something like we talk about climate change which has no clarity of how it is coming, and now I want to actually put this question again, that what is like more important to bring up and question? Is it like the regional developmental issues, environmental issues that are causing more harm, or is it something like climate change which actually has clarity, or sometimes it's not that productive as well to talk about? I mean, I may sound like climate denier, but I'm not. I'm actually trying to break that question in a more productive ways. And also understanding climate change, which is also not a lot. I have something to say, which is, so when we talk about climate change and adaptation as well, what I see here is when we frame the question, it comes with something with Dr. Kasha called anticipatory ruination, which frames climate change as an ultimate evil which is actually going to destroy everything. And now with that, they offer solutions which are still in the same kind of in the same development regime, putting questions with externalities, investment, risk, insurance. But what I feel like we often often ignore the regional environmental and developmental issues which are bigger and actually are causing most of the agricultural problems. So with that, what I feel like we still have this bigger question. Is it something like we talk about climate change which has no clarity of how it is coming, and now I want to actually put this question again, that what is like more important to bring up and question? Is it like the regional developmental issues, environmental issues that are causing more harm, or is it something like climate change which actually has clarity, or sometimes it's not that productive as well to talk about? I mean, I may sound like climate denier, but I'm not. I'm actually trying to break that question in a more productive ways.
Try and keep them brief. I think the first one really is about a bit more detail. So you said cotton means onions. I just wanted to know for how long have they been following this crop cycle, because that might tell us something more about how long they've been playing T20 cricket as opposed to Test cricket. The second thing, obviously, it's a local micro study, and I wanted to ask how it relates to broader patterns, which is that if they've been doing these three crops for quite some time, with some irrigation, obviously, is it leading to people actually choosing to stay in the farm, given the fact that you don't have a lot of non-farm jobs, or they're not able to find decent jobs, as James was saying the other day. So something in terms of broader patterns in relation to a return to agriculture. And the final one really has to do more with the social-cultural understanding of temporality. And we know from Craig Jeffrey and the others that aspirations have played a very big role in the move away from agriculture. But when you do, and of course then that requires investments in education, and that alters your sense of time. You refer to E.P. Thompson, but education itself has to move out of agriculture, right? So if that is the case, how much of what you said has to do with broader shifts in the Indian economy and the fundamental reorientation of aspirations themselves? All right, thank you.
Hi, my question is also from Marcus. Thank you. First, I really like that idea of accumulation through that scheme that is happening. So for crop care, one question that I have is, what is happening in such a capital-intensive agriculture that they are doing, to the labor, to their own family labor first? What is happening to today's workers in the system?
First, thank you everybody for really stimulating presentations. I have brief questions to everyone. The first question is to Marcus. You suggest that there is no research on temporality. There is Lucie Dubochet on temporality and gender access to policy. In the 1970s, Graham Chapman looked at temporalities in Bihar agriculture in relation to the nakshatras, which were being messed up not by climate change but by high-yielding technology. And of course, there's all this early Robert Chambers, before he became roadside bias and participatory and all the rest, on seasonality. A question to both you and to Dr. Rita. Thank you very much. Toward the end of yours and toward the end of your presentation, you both talked about perishability and losses. And it's not really a question, but a very brief comment, which is that we really need, as researchers, to rethink the idea of waste and loss. We have pollution in the soil, which is a waste of inputs. Yeah? We have greenhouse gases. We have low capacity utilization in technology, which is a waste of engineering resources. We have then waste and losses in the food system, which are defined variously. It is well overdue that these concepts were unified, and maybe new words or new concepts, but at least some systematic research on waste. To Professor Birthal, two very brief questions. you said that insurance is one answer to the question what is to be done. I had always thought that insurance companies were trying to reduce liabilities related to climate change from their portfolios of obligations. So the question to you about insurance is, what incentives would the insurance company have to include climate change risk? And then, final comments to Professor Kumar. What you said was your critique of IPCC thinking and methods is well overdue. My own personal experience of these committees is that they do pose a big problem for us as social scientists, because once scientists have done their models, they result in shopping lists, enormous shopping lists, and then their role, their social role, their political role has finished, right? The rest is not their role. And to try to persuade scientists to engage with what they regard as low status, inferior, dirty work of politicians is something that is a big challenge for the 21st century. Thank you.
Sandeep, that's the last question. Probably anyone else?
I just wanted to draw some attention towards data quality and availability, particularly with respect to agriculture. And since we have this climate data discussion, I think there is definitely a technical aspect to sort of using the climate data, and that has got to do with how climate community uses the climate data. But I think the greater challenge is with respect to the availability and quality of agricultural data that is particularly required to study climate change. And now that we are working towards adaptation, it is a particular challenge, and this is coming from someone who has been working in this field for quite some time, that the input data sets like irrigation or with respect to high variety seeds or adoption of technology, the scale that we need for these data sets are just not available, with the scope that we need. So I think that's something that is important that we should look into it.
Thank you. There are a lot of questions already. I'll add one, probably one I would like to ask Marcus, one to Professor Birthal here. This is that I just want to take off from where Professor Barbara had left it. That is this long history of these T20s. T20 cricket is new, but I think we had a lot of T20s in agriculture very early. So when you move from, and that depends of course, in Maharashtra of course we had long crops of sugarcane, cotton and so on, which had sort of constrained that shift. But more recently you do have this soybean, maize coming up and all kinds of mixes coming up, and there are, where there was one crop, one long crop, there are two crops or even sometimes three crops if you have water. So this shift is there. But I just wanted to ask you, how do you, in this long history of intensification that we had, particularly in states like Maharashtra, what is distinct about the new phase that you are seeing? That's one thing that I want to ask. Professor Birthal, you did mention about the Fasal Bima Yojana. There was already a question on insurance, but I just wanted to add something to it, which is that, there is a widespread feeling that that scheme is not successful. And a number of states, Gujarat, West Bengal, earlier Andhra Pradesh, but they've come back, Telangana, they all exited the scheme at different stages, saying that this is not suitable or adequately customized to the state-specific needs that we have in each state. And they don't appear to be coming back at any point soon. So what do you think such a scheme should look like if it brings all states on board and it adequately takes care of the context in each state vis-a-vis risks and vulnerabilities? Thank you. So we'll just go to each each paper presenter for their responses. I would request you to kindly keep your responses brief, maybe 2 minutes if possible. Maybe we'll start the other way around. Dr. Kavi Kumar, if you could start.
Yeah, there are not specific questions to me except a comment from Barbara. So I do agree that IPCC's engagement with the social and political scientists is very minimal, so it needs to be a lot more than what it is. I guess also my other comment is essentially is that IPCC should lead the research or the other way around. I still stick to the point that probably IPCC should actually synthesize and give product controls rather than actually leading the whole research. Then there seems to be a chicken and egg problem here. So I'm not convinced about the IPCC system there. Now, I'm not directly asked this, but one of the participants asked about local environmental issues versus the climate change, which is more important. I guess we have. I'm completely in favor of local environmental issues and regional development issues to be first prioritized, which seems to be a pending issue for a longer time for us. But at the same time, ignoring climate change out of this makes no sense because they are quite heavily intertwined. So you cannot simply put a kind of a picking order in this. Both have to be understood, but just doing climate change without having any concern for regional or local issues is a meaningless exercise. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Professor Birthal?
Yeah, quickly I would like first try to answer your questions. Yes, there are states which are getting out of Parliament because of the immigration. There are states which have not adopted. And there are reasons for that. There are political reasons also for that. And there are agroclimatic reasons for that. Say for example, Punjab didn't adopt because of irrigation. I could not show that slide. Because what I found is that benefits of irrigation and insurance, they are much less in irrigated areas. So some states they will not go for this kind of situation. Rather, these benefits, both insurance and irrigation, they are almost at par in rural environments, where the irrigation is mostly like the local and environments. This is the way out is that this is the area in kind of insurance schemes. And a lot of issues are involved in that, particularly crop cutting experiments. Of course, the government has been trying to go for remote sensing kind of crop surveys for all those kind of, but to what extent it can be achieved to, arrive at some kind of premiums. And the more important thing, as I said, is the risk zone. That is more important. Our entire country had to be risk zone, identify the activities, crops, etc., their needs, risk levels and all that, and then decide the premium. So we extend the most important fact. We should switch over to parametric insurance or the level-based insurance. We have two types of insurance, of course, now. Area and we have some kind of level-based insurance, particularly for horticulture crops. So we have not done any kind of such study for horticulture crops. Is it really beneficial? And I think the parametric insurance, some private players have entered into this parametric insurance. So the trigger is the, whether they fit rainfall or excess temperature or excess rainfall. And when there is a trigger, there is an automatic payout for the farmers who buy those kind of insurance. And one important incentive for farmers is that, of course, they have got the payout. They will try to avoid the crop loss by investing more on those kind of things. This is good. On the question what Barbara asked, it's really very difficult, the incentive for the companies. I think the most important incentive for them is, accumulation of the premiums. Because risk doesn't happen, the probability of risk, maybe once in 3 years or 5 years. So from there, and the scale, particularly, about 33% of the out of the gross crop area, which we can say about 70 million hectares. It is brought under crop insurance scheme, and above all, it is the premium which is subsidized by the government. So this kind of things, these are the incentives for the companies. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rita.
Translate for me, and
and say with me. A proposito del rapporto tra le istituzioni e la cooperazione, è vero che la cooperazione in Italia è supportata dalle istituzioni, ma le istituzioni hanno regolato la cooperazione dopo che la cooperazione stessa aveva costituito sistemi che sono stati appunto definiti normativamente. In Emilia-Romagna in particolare c'è una regolazione della cooperazione molto importante e supportiva, come Simone sa meglio di me. Sulla dieta mediterranea lascio a te, come dicevo, non tanto un manifesto di descrizione dietologica, ma un disegno di organizzazione produttiva, e da ultimo sull'economia del riuso, o meglio sugli scarti. È possibile costruire un'economia del riuso sia dal punto di vista economico che dal punto di vista sociale, includendo le persone al lavoro.
Yes, I translate for Rita. The first question was on the help that the institution can give to cooperatives. Rita argued that, yes, they help cooperatives, but after the regulation they gave to us. So they brought a legal framework in there, and thereafter this legal framework they are supporting. But in a sense, we probably anticipated them. So sometimes they are supporting the idea we develop on our own. On the second question of the Mediterranean diet, I will answer myself, so I go on with Rita. And on the waste situation, it's very inspiring what you said, that we should put together all the kinds of waste we have, because normally we work on food waste, right? But there are all the other kinds before. So it's really good. And we have an approach to this that, of course, is on food chains and whatever. We have a very important professor in Bologna, in fact. She's Andrea Segre, that works especially on this, and it's also on the food waste system on the EU. And in general, all these waste situations should be addressed by having normally a cooperative approach and considering together all the activities we can do. Now there is also an issue on the waste of computer space, and our cooperative, the bit we are losing in communication, because now also the impact of storage of data is really big, and there is a project there developing going. On the Mediterranean data, I will be very quick, diet, I will be very quick. First I say something also on the support from producer organizations. At the European level, there are producer organizations defined, which are not necessarily cooperative, so this helps your framework. I suggest to study the CMO way of supporting. CMO means Common Market Organization, and it's the piece of legislation in the EU that supports this kind of operational programs that are used mainly in fruit and vegetables, but also in some other, on the oil and some others, that are really good in supporting innovation, and particular innovation for adaptation and mitigation. In our experiences, those funds have been absolutely crucial for what I showed yesterday, particularly the DSS we developed with cooperatives, because they support the accessibility for members to sensors, all the technology the farmer needs in his home. So it goes to the farm. On the Mediterranean diet, only this. For us, is a democratic approach to, and a social approach to diet and to food systems. This is the point. Because in one of the points of the manifesto, you couldn't read because it was in Italian, they said the food is a human right. So it's exactly what this conference said the first day. And if you read it, it's really in line with what we are arguing in this conference. I suggest you to contact Sara Versi. She is the director of the International Study Center on Mediterranean Data, which is in Polica. She is working with FAO on a lot of activity in which people from all over the world are involved. So please send them some of your guys, because it would really be interesting. Because it's an approach of sustainability that is rooted on the territory, on the fact you shouldn't be extractive, health of population. It's really holistic in its approach.
Thank you. Marcus, sorry, but
Sorry,
you're a friend.
Is it climate? Question. It is climate, but climate is only expressed in and through a wider set of relationships. I've actually wrote a book starting from that point. So very much so, it's far more than climate, and if climate becomes exceptionalism, we lose track of the wider set of questions, relationships to which you're referring. How long has Cotton Maize T20 agriculture been going? In this part of Madagascar, it's later than certain other states to bring in the onions. People were doing it in the 2010s, 2018. If the break-even price of onions is about 700 per quintal rupees, 1,200 makes a bit of money. In 2018, the price went up to 7,000 rupees per quintal, and after that, damn it, everyone's doing onions, right? That was the thing, because people reinvested those windfall monies into tractors and stuff. Those that were gambling then won big. Now everyone's like, got to go in. But what makes a difference, particularly water, and particularly the rise of integrated groundwater into farm ponds. For those who can afford them, to privatise their own little bit of groundwater for the rest of the season, that's making a huge difference. And again, this is very class-based when we talk about farmers and Indian agriculture. There aren't farmers, there's different sets of farmers on very different trajectories here. Micro to macro are people choosing to stay in the farmer aspirations. This is definitely an aging set of farmers, we're seeing that. Some younger farmers say our aspiration, the soil is in our blood and we have to come do this, but broadly this is older and they're hoping they're youngest. And I should say, the nature of the methodology of research, we're talking farmers, some only had 3 acres, but many of those medium or small medium farmers we're interviewing here. The question of time and poker, obviously when I hope I didn't say no one's written on time, but it hasn't been a big feature except in relationship to gender and time series data, time poverty, lots of work there, really interesting. I had a little bit of it in the paper, but I haven't got there. Sorry, running on. But one of the key things about poker, it is one of the biggest climate resilient agriculture programs here, and it is driving diversification because of how uneven it is, because the smallholders can't go for the bigger ticket items. I actually, just to end this, and I think this is a point we could reflect on, I interviewed the superintendent of agriculture for the entire region of Aragaland, and I said, look, we've done this study. We've been cooperatives do a big program, and you get a big scale about it. So we've interviewed farmers and farmers, and can tell you the big benefits of going to the bigger farmers. They know how to use the system, etc. They manipulate the FPOs. And he looked at me and goes, yeah, Marcus, but this is India.
Poker has bigger problems. This is India and that is World Bank. There's two problems. So that makes a deadly comedy, right? So thank you so much for all the speakers, Professor Kavi Kumar, Professor Birthal, Rita Ghedini, and Professor Marcus Taylor. Thank you so much. It was a very engaging session, and thank you, Jayaraman, for putting it together like this. It was a very intensive, good discussion that we've had, and I think we can, of course, as was suggested here, take these collaborations forward in different ways. Thank you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.